Okay, good stuff. Good to see a lot of people here. Actually see some people I haven't seen for a very, very long time, so that's very nice as well. So that's very good. I'm pleased to see that you're all here, come out to practice the Dhamma on Sunday morning. It's a good way to spend your Sunday morning. So I wanted to ask you a question first before I start anything. And what I want you to do in answering this question is take all your Buddhist preconceived notions off the table. Take Buddhism off the table just for a moment. Who here thinks their life is pretty good? Yeah? You think your life's pretty good? Yeah? Why do you think your life's pretty good? Got the Buddha's teachings? That's a good thing, yeah? Yeah? Yeah?
I want stuff and I can achieve it.
Yeah, you want stuff, you can... Yeah, you can get it, good. You know, you have friends, you have family, there's love in the world, you have a good life, you're in a good country. So at the basis of your being, do you think your life is pretty good? Yeah, yeah. What about existence in the world? Do you think, again, take the Buddhist, I know you're going to be like, if I'm a Buddhist and I need to give you a particular kind of answer, don't give me that answer. Give me the answer that you really feel at the base of your being. Do you think that the world and your existence is pretty good? That it's good to exist? Yeah? Yeah? Is it better to exist than to not exist? Yeah? Yeah, if not, no. There's one person shaking their head. As I said, take the Buddhist stuff off the table. Take the Buddhist stuff off the table. So, do we think that to exist in some way is pretty good? Yeah, to actually be awake and alive. So what's the alternative now? To not exist. You don't exist. So that's, it's maybe not so great. And so we can think, well, is the world pretty good? The world that we exist in, is that pretty good? Not really? What about the good things in the world? What about the good things in the world? Love, art, music, nature, a sunset, being with friends, being with family. Is that pretty good? Yeah? Yeah? Okay, let's throw the Buddhist card back on the table again now. Now, how are we going to square this that, and I count myself in this group as well. It's like, I think my life is pretty good. I get food, I get all these things, I get to meet all these nice people, I have a very intellectually stimulating life. I actually think it's pretty good to exist. So I'm with you in this intuition. So let's throw this Buddhist card back on the table now then. So how do we square this intuition that maybe we have with this fundamental teaching of Buddhism that existence is dukkha? For anybody that doesn't know what dukkha is, just to describe, dukkha, for anybody that doesn't know, is we usually translate dukkha as suffering or unsatisfactoriness, or my personal favorite at the moment is discontent. I like the word discontent. But essentially, one of the core fundamental teachings of Buddhism is that to be a human, to exist, existence is dukkha. Existence is suffering. So why do we say this as Buddhists? If I think for myself, it's like my life's pretty good, existence is pretty good, why should the Buddhist try to convince you that existence is suffering, that existence is dukkha? Again, you can say, well, look, I can see that there's something, as you said, there's some things in life that are not so good. But there's things like headaches, there's things like problems, there's all these kinds of things, but there's all these other good things in the world as well. Why is existence suffering? Now, the bottom line is here with most of these things is when you ask people this, it's usually younger people that say to you, it's like, that's ridiculous, how the existence isn't suffering. Usually, most of the time when you say existence is dukkha, people look at you like you're insane, that there's something sort of wrong with you. And again, it's usually coming from this place of not really understanding exactly what we mean when we talk about dukkha in the Buddhist sense of the word. So what is it that we actually mean by dukkha? Who knows what dukkha actually is? Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, that's one of them.
That similarly, because things are impermanent, there's suffering.
Yep,
And because we can't find stable happiness.
Yep.
So, and then that goes into the non-self thing. But
Yep.
birth is suffering, death is suffering, old age is suffering.
yep,
What craving to be is suffering.
Yep.
Craving not to be, sensual desire.
yep,
Those
yep,
are the three
Yeah.
kinds that come. Yeah.
yep. So,
Being with what we don't like, not being with what we like.
yep,
Yeah.
yep. So that's a very good answer, and that's the Buddhist answer. That's the kind of the Buddhist answer as well. So we have to try to understand what we're talking about when we're talking about what dukkha actually is, and to get clear on that, like you said. There's essentially what we're talking about in Buddhism when we talk about dukkha, is there's essentially three kinds of dukkha. There's what we could call like evident suffering. There's what we could call the suffering of change, the suffering of impermanence, and then there's the suffering of pervasive conditioning, which is for the people that know a little bit more about this kind of stuff. It's essentially that we're involved in dependent origination. There's paticca samuppada. There is a sabbe sankhara dukkha, sabbe dhamma anatta. Is that we are a part of conditioned phenomena, and then we have no agency within that. So there's those three kinds of suffering that we actually have, that we're talking about from the Buddhist perspective. Now, so what's the first level then? What is evident suffering? So that's things like that are things that are evident in your life. So you have headaches, you get sick, you have meetings that you have to go to that you don't like, you have people in your life that are annoying. If you live in Melbourne, you have to deal with the public transport and people like young guys on public transport with a loudspeaker that thinks that everybody should listen to their music that has a lot of swearing in it, and there's all these old ladies on the bus, and you have to deal with these kinds of people, and getting stuck in traffic and all these kinds of things. So there's these evident kinds of suffering in the world. There's also things like, we have sadness, we have embarrassment, we have these different aspects of our lives, these different kinds of stress. And this is something that's evident within our life. Now, we have these evident kinds of suffering, but we might think, I can actually, that's fine. That's a part of life. I can deal with these things. This is just evident as something that's there. But we have to go a little bit deeper than that when we're looking at what evident suffering actually is. Evident suffering is also these bigger things that are in life. There's just been an earthquake in Turkey. There's been tens of thousands of people that have died in that. There's a war in Ukraine where innocent civilians are having their homes destroyed and their lives are lost and they're becoming injured. There's people in the Congo that have these sort of tribes of marauders come through and rape and pillage and take people into slavery and things like that. There's all these things that are in the world that are evident suffering. Now, what we have to face up to is that, again, remember, our lives, we said at the start, it's pretty good. My life is pretty good. I think existence is okay. So for anybody that says, no, actually, this suffering thing is wrong, what you have to do is you have to be okay that those things are happening. You have to say to yourself that this doesn't bother you. That the earthquake in Turkey doesn't bother you. That you're totally okay with this. That this is, it's fine. Now, you probably should be like a little bit uncomfortable with that. You have to, if you're a normal person, you have to be a little bit uncomfortable with that. So you now actually have a choice of the way that you can answer me on this. Are you okay with that? No? No? Yeah? So you can answer in one of two ways. I'm okay with this, and this doesn't bother me. And if that doesn't bother you, then you're suffering from being a I'll let you insert your own swear word there, because I shouldn't say that on the in this context. You're suffering from that, but if you say, well, I'm not okay with that kind of suffering, then you're suffering with the knowledge that these things happen. And so what this is actually showing us is that our lives really are interdependent in some kind of way. And that to exist, we are interdependent with other things, and there are evident suffering in life. So just this fact that we exist and that we're interdependent with things is to guarantee that there is going to be some kind of suffering in the world. So we have evident suffering that, as I said, we have to be okay to live with, and if we're not okay with it, we just have to accept that this is a kind of suffering that is part of human existence. The second kind of suffering that we actually have is the suffering of change, the dukkha of change, the dukkha of impermanence. This essentially means that good things can't stay good forever. Now, again, if we look at somebody that's younger than me, there's not actually many people that are younger than me at the moment, kind of thing. Because I don't want to pick on anybody here, actually. I want to pick on myself. Kat, you're probably younger than me. Yeah, I'm 41. Yeah, you're younger than me. It's anyway. Let's just. Well, there's somebody on the internet that's listening to me that's younger than me. So as I said, I don't want to point anybody out here. So if we actually think, okay, there's a suffering of change, what does that actually mean? What that actually means is whatever state that you're in, if you look at somebody like me, at some point you're going to end up like me. I'm a bit flabby. I'm a bit flabby now. I'm getting wrinkles. When I went home, my beard got grey, kind of thing. I get some grey hair coming through. That this is actually a part of your existence that you're going to change. Now you might look at that and go, I don't want to be older. I don't want to actually experience aging like that. And so I asked the question, well, what's the alternative? You can die young. That's not a great alternative. I look at people that are older here in the audience than me. It's like, oh man, I don't want to get that old, and I don't want to do that. But it's like, okay, there's the alternative. I die now. I don't really want that. So if we look at the change that's in our lives in this kind of way, then we actually see that when we look at our existence, we are really a corpse in the making. You are this fact of that you inhabit this body that you have means that you're some kind of disease factory, that this is going to actually happen to you. Now you can like most people, you can look at that and go, well, okay, I'm not like that now. I'm fine now. I'm healthy. I'm strong. I'll worry about that. I'll worry about that if it ever happens to me. I doubt it'll ever happen to me, but it's so you can say that. You can deny that, but again, you're still suffering. You're suffering from self-deception. So what's it better to suffer from? Is it better to suffer from self-deception, or is it better to suffer from facing up to the existential reality of having a body and having an existence? Accepting, yeah. You can pick self-delusion if you want. That's fine. I'm not saying you have to do either one of them. So we have to face up to this and face up to it in some way that we deceive ourselves about this change. Now it's a great reflection, and there's a lot of people. There's some really interesting things going on of people that talk about the denial of death or something like that as and the way that we cope with that is actually denying things in a particular kind of way. There was Ernest Brewer wrote a book in the 70s called The Denial of Death, which sort of spurred on what we call terror management theory now, which is by Solomon and Goldberg and Brzezinski, which essentially what it says is that we're faced with this existential void of nothingness and death, and this terrifies us. And we spend everything that we do in our life is an attempt to cover that over, is to deny that, is to actually move in some kind of way where we're actually forgetting that that's actually happening to us. Now, obviously, that's a newer kind of modality of thinking that's happening. But if we look at, sort of back in the 7th century, Shantideva was saying very similar kinds of things. He was saying that essentially we're all like fish that are stuck in a net, and every movement that we make, we're trying to get out of that net. And so this reality that there is this kind of existential terror or dread that we are finite and that we will change, this causes us to overlook this factor of change. And so the third kind of suffering that we have is this suffering of pervasive conditioning. Now, what does pervasive conditioning actually mean? Again, for the people that maybe know some Pali, this is paticca samuppada, dependent origination. But in more simple kinds of terms, what this means is that we feel like we're an individual, and we're an individual that has control over our existence. There's this kind of tension between that feeling, but then the knowledge or the reality that we're actually very, very interdependent and we have no control over really anything. So if we actually sort of look at this in some kind of way, we can actually start to see that what does it actually mean to feel like that we're an individual and that we control everything? Like, let's take that to its logical nth. To be an individual and have control over everything yourself, what does that actually mean? That means you do things like, okay, your food. How do you get food? Okay, well, if I'm an individual and I control everything, I grow my own food, and I make my own food, but then you also have to control the soil that you plant this in. You have to control the water that is in the environment. You have to control the process of photosynthesis. You have to control the sun coming up and going down. You have to control all these things. If you want a pair of shoes, if you really are an individual that you have control over everything and you have absolute autonomy over everything, then this means the shoes that you have to make your shoes yourself, but then you also have to produce the plastic. If you want leather shoes, you have to produce the cow that made the leather. So we can see that our lives are very, very interdependent. Now, this was true when we were a hunter-gatherer society, but this is even more so true now. Everything that we get, it's from this complex causal net that we're actually getting these different things that we actually need to live. Now, so what does this mean? This means that something that somebody does over the other side of the world impacts you in some way, affects you in some kind of way. Anything that happens in the world affects you. Might affect trade, might affect how you get your bananas, but in some way it's going to affect you in some kind of way. So what this is showing us is that we're very, very causally interdependent on each other, and we don't control this process. Things happen on the other side of the world, but it does impact us in some kind of way. So if we look at that, then we can actually start to go, well, yeah, I don't really have control over a lot of things. So what this means is that, a drunk driver can come out of nowhere and kill you, and you have no control over this. So it's this tension between wanting to be an independent, a gentle agent in the world that controls things, and this tension between that things are actually very, very interdependent, causally conditioned, and we actually don't have any kind of control over it. So when we talk about dukkha in Buddhism, this is what we're talking about. This is what we're not talking about this kind of pessimistic view of the world. This is what we're talking about. We're talking about that there's evident suffering, that there is things in the world that are evidently suffering. There is the suffering of change, and there is the suffering of pervasive conditioning. And what all we're saying as Buddhists is that we have to face up to this. is that we have to actually look at this objectively and go, well, this is a part of reality. But we also have to face up to the kind of self-denial or the methods of denial that we actually use to cover that up. So can anybody now actually see any problem with those three things? Evident suffering, suffering of change, or pervasive conditioning. Can anybody see any problem with any of those? I can. Anybody? Yeah, they suck. Yeah, they they definitely suck.
Yeah, it's all impermanent. It's not absolute suffering.
Mm.
Like, pervasive conditioning, what makes you sad, you could get happy later and just,
Yeah.
you can sort of be okay with that whole dependent origination.
Yeah.
Maybe it's not, that's
Yeah.
something I can see wrong
Yeah.
with it.
Yeah.
It's not suffering, it's happiness.
Yeah.
Just as much,
Yeah. What about evident suffering? What's the problem with evident suffering? What's the problem with that logic? If there's evident suffering, there has to be evident. Yeah. There's good things in the world. That has to be there as well. So if suffering is evident, happiness has to be evident as well. The birth of Venus hangs in the Uffizi Gallery at the moment. Botticelli's The Birth of Venus. This is a cause of it's a condition that is there. This is happiness. If there's some kind of racism or prejudice in the world, then there is the cause of somebody moving against that to overcome that racism or prejudice. There's coffee in the world. Like, there's coffee there, and it's all around. It's like, this is a good thing. There's puppies in the world. So if there is evident suffering, there also has to be evident happiness as well. We can take that, yeah? Change. What's the problem there? Some of it's evolutionary change, yeah? Yeah, exactly. Some things change for the better. Sometimes things change, but they do change for the better. To actually, to have, for us to evolve, to grow, there has to be some period of decay. There has to be, for growth, there has to be decay. So the suffering of change, well, it's like, well, look, we can sort of say in some kind of way that maybe change, it's not such a bad thing. What about interdependence? What's wrong with that? If it all works, but
well, there's this delusion that we're not a lot of the time. That things aren't interdependent, like, that thinking.
yeah.
I'm an ego, I'm this, I'm God or whatever type thing, versus seeing that reality where we are causally connected and thinking that your actions don't have influences.
Yeah.
But there's that side of reality, like it's
Yeah.
different.
The thing that jumps to my mind is it's actually good that things are interdependent. I don't want to perform surgery on myself. Like, I'm very glad that there's a causal nexus of people that can make my phone and make the internet and all these kinds of things. This is a good thing. So we can see that maybe there's some tension there with these things. So this is where most people have the argument with dukkha. We can actually start to say, it's like, hang on, no, this is all wrong. Dukkha is, this dukkha thing, it's all wrong. Actually, dukkha isn't the pervasive condition of our existence. Happiness and goodness is. We can say that. We can say that suffering might be the cause for moral growth. Suffering might be the cause for you to some kind of personal development in some kind of way. If you think of Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning, very, very terrible thing happened from that, developed some kind of purpose from it, and this is actually, it's a worldwide phenomena, and so there's something very personal about personal growth that comes from suffering. We can look at things in the world, if there's some kind of suffering, this guides how we make our decisions. This guides how we actually deal with problems. So actually having suffering there, this is a good thing because this is an actual cause for good in the world. Does everyone agree with that? Yeah? You don't have to. I'm not saying you have to.
One attachment comes in there. And this is fundamental issue. I mean, because you have the attachment,
Yeah.
suffering.
Yeah.
We expect that everything's going to be permanent, the bad things, but it's all the attachment.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not going to change anything.
Yeah, so there's the attachment, but attaching to something that is better also might be good as well. Attaching to, no, this thing is wrong, so I think it should be better in some kind of way. Attaching to a good outcome might be a good thing. Attaching to a negative outcome might be a bad thing. So we can sort of see what we have here is what I like to think of as a foreground and a background problem. Now, a foreground and a background problem here is that as what people might think is that the background of our existence, the base level of our existence is happiness, it is goodness. And that suffering comes along, and it's more in the foreground, and it's something that temporarily comes along, but things are generally good, yeah? But Buddhists, we say it's a different way around. We say that suffering is in the background, and that the happiness is in the foreground, and suffering that's something that comes along just permanently and bumps in there. So let's play with this intuition. What is the Buddhist view of this? Why do we view suffering as the background and not the foreground? So there's this really cool analogy from Tibetan Buddhism, which is it's really visceral, and I hate thinking of it, but it paints the picture so well. The way they conceptualize happiness in the world is like having honey on a razor blade and licking the razor blade to get the happiness. I just love when people sort of, ugh, because I do the same thing. So we sort of say that this is the underlying condition that's there for this thing. Now, for suffering to be considered the base of our existence, again, the razor blade, not the honey, the base of our existence, all we have to do is when we look out in the world, we know that existence is suffering, and when something good happens, we're okay with that. It doesn't bother me. I accept that, yeah, something good happens. And I can accept that. Now, does that sound reasonable? Yeah? So again, but if we get back to the other example, if I think happiness is the basis of life, and these blips of suffering come along, does that bother me? Does tens of thousands of people dying in Turkey, you can say that doesn't bother me? People dying in war, that doesn't bother me? I don't think anybody really looks at themselves in the mirror and goes, that doesn't bother me at all. So this is why we, as Buddhists, we say we have this intuition that suffering is at the basis, but that happiness is something that comes along temporarily. Now, why does it do this? Why does this actually happen? How do we have this kind of intuition here that that there is suffering at the base, that it is this basic condition, but that happiness is more like a temporary blip. It is more like a distraction, you could say. Why do we have this? Essentially, what we think of in Buddhist terms of what causes this suffering, what causes this distraction from the suffering, is what we call, in Buddhist speak, we call it avidya, which is, I like to call it primal confusion, a kind of confusion of the way that we view the world. Some people call it ignorance, some people call it delusion. If you call it ignorance, what usually happens is there's this kind of thought that you're ignorant of something, or it's a negative kind of thing, or you're negating something, or you're missing something. That's more why I like kind of confusion, is because what's happening is you're becoming confused about something about reality. And there's a really nice example of what the being distracted or being deceived by happiness and how like primal confusion operates in that. It's for this really nice quote from a Buddhist philosopher, and I think it was the 8th century. It's called Tsongkhapa, and he basically said that what we do is we superimpose a misunderstanding of reality onto the reality that we actually perceive. So that there is suffering there, but we misperceive and we superimpose something on top of that. So we see something like primal confusion, we see avijja as something, as a way that we're adding something onto this. This is, you could say, something we're adding to, where it's a positive thing, it's not a negative thing. So this is what we're doing a lot of the time, is we're saying that the world essentially has this bottom layer, it has this dukkha at the bottom layer, but what we're doing is we're becoming distracted by happiness that comes along. We're superimposing happiness on a condition of suffering. We're misperceiving our existence that we think is suffering. Happiness that comes along, we're misperceiving that. So this is the tension that we face. This is the tension that we face in everything. If we consider that everything in existence is dukkha, we're just distracting ourselves. We're deceiving ourselves. We're telling ourselves that some kind of happiness that comes along, that this is the way reality is. But essentially what we're arguing as Buddhists is that, no, this is a distraction from the way things are. So this is where we can start to think about this a little bit deeper now then. And what's the problem with that? What's actually, okay, so is suffering, dukkha, permeates existence. What's the problem there? What's the objection there? We alluded to it before. So this is the thing. I'm not going to answer this for you. I don't want to answer this for you. What do we actually really think? Do we actually really think that suffering is the permanent condition of existence, or is happiness the permanent condition of existence? Which do we think it is? What's the problem with suffering being the permanent aspect of condition of existence?
It's too extreme.
It's too extreme? Yeah. So again, I'm not going to answer this for you. What I would much rather do, it is much more interesting. I think it's better if you discuss this yourself. You discuss this yourself, and then you tell me what you think. And so what I'm going to do today is I'm going to ask you questions. I don't want to answer anybody's questions today. I'm going to ask you questions about this. And be forewarned, whatever you tell me, I'm going to take the opposite position. I'm not going to say I support it, but I'm just going to take the opposite position. And for you, what I want you to do is actually think about this for yourselves. You can sit here and you can listen to me, but what benefit is that? I'd rather you actually think about these things for yourself and discuss it with yourself. So what we'll do, we can sort of find the people around you, have a chat to them. Is suffering in the background or is it in the foreground? We'll chat for maybe 10 minutes or so, and just for the people online, I'll jump on, and if you want to say something, if you want to say something to me, you want to debate this, that's fine. But we'll come back in about 10 minutes, and we'll talk about it. Go for it. Turn to somebody that you don't know.